The warning lights flashed red across the cargo ship's control panel as Marcus Reed fought with the controls. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering column, trying to keep the ship steady through its violent descent. The navigation system, fried by an unexpected solar flare, displayed nothing but static, leaving him flying blind through the alien planet's thick atmosphere. Come on, he muttered, his eyes darting between the altitude meter and the rapidly approaching ground. The ship's hull groaned under the intense pressure of the high-gravity world, metal panels screaming as they bent against forces they were never designed to withstand. The ground rushed up to meet him, a landscape of strange purple crystal formations stretching as far as the eye could see. Marcus pulled back on the controls with all his strength, trying to level out the ship's nose. The cargo vessel responded sluggishly, but it was enough to turn what would have been a fatal nosedive into a survivable crash landing. The impact came like a hammer blow. The ship skidded across the rocky ground, carving a half-mile-long trench through the alien soil. Metal shrieked and sparks flew as the vessel finally ground to a halt, coming to rest in a valley surrounded by towering crystalline spires that reflected the light of the system's distant sun. When the dust settled, Marcus pulled himself from the wreckage, his body aching from the crash. The planet's gravity immediately made itself known. Each step felt like he was wearing a heavy backpack. His environmental suit's readings showed something surprising. The atmosphere was breathable, though thick with strange gases he'd never seen before. Taking his first breath of alien air, Marcus felt his chest strain against the heavy atmosphere. It wasn't comfortable, but he could breathe. That was one piece of good news, at least. He needed it, because the ship's emergency beacon was crushed beyond repair in the crash. A deep, resonant howl echoed through the valley, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Marcus turned slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the utility knife at his belt. Through the purple haze of the atmosphere, he saw movement, something big. The creature that emerged from behind a crystal formation moved like a wolf but looked like nothing Earth had ever produced. 6 muscular legs carried a body covered in thick, armored scales. Its head housed 3 pairs of eyes, all fixed directly on him, and a mouth full of teeth arranged in rotating rows like a shark's. Marcus backed away slowly, his mind racing. The creature's muscles bulged unnaturally under its scales, an adaptation to the high gravity, he realized. This was a predator perfectly evolved for this harsh world. The beast charged. Despite its size, it moved with frightening speed. Marcus dove behind a piece of the crashed ship, his heart pounding. The creature slammed into the metal with enough force to leave deep dents. The sound of its impact echoed through the valley, and more howls answered in the distance. Looking around desperately, Marcus spotted the cargo hold. If he could reach it, he might find something useful among the shipping containers. The predator circled the wreckage, searching for a way to reach him. Its movements were calculated, intelligent. This wasn't just some mindless beast. It was a skilled hunter. Marcus waited until the creature moved to the far side of the wreck, then sprinted for the cargo hold. The high gravity made every step feel like he was running through wet cement, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He reached the hold just as the predator realized where he'd gone. Inside, Marcus slammed the emergency lock controls. The reinforced doors groaned shut just as the creature slammed into them. Safe for the moment, he slid down against a cargo container, breathing heavily in the dense air. The reality of his situation sank in. His ship was destroyed. The emergency beacon was broken. He was stranded on an unknown world with atmosphere that barely sustained human life, gravity that made every movement a challenge, and predators unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. And somewhere out there, more howls were getting closer. Marcus looked at the cargo containers around him. "Time to see what I have to work with," he said to himself, standing up on shaking legs, "because I'm not dying on this rock." Marcus spent 3 days in the cargo hold, listening to the predators circle his crashed ship. He used this time wisely, sorting through the cargo containers. Most held mining equipment, tools, power cells, and industrial gear. Not exactly survival supplies, but Marcus knew he could work with them. On the fourth day, the howls grew distant. Looking through a crack in the hull, he spotted a cave in the nearby cliff face. It was high up, with a narrow approach path. Defensible. If he was going to survive, he needed a better shelter than the broken ship. He packed carefully: power tools, emergency rations, portable lights, and anything else he could carry. The planet's crushing gravity made each item feel 3 times heavier than normal. Even his own body felt like it was made of lead. The 100-meter dash to the cave was the longest run of his life. Every step was a battle against the gravity. His lungs burned, trying to pull oxygen from the thick air. Behind him, he heard the howls getting closer. The predators had spotted him. Marcus reached the cave just as the first beast appeared. It was different from the one he'd seen before, larger, with bony plates covering its back. The creature tried to follow him up the narrow path but struggled with its bulk. An interesting weakness, Marcus noted. The very adaptations that made these predators powerful in the valley's open spaces limited their mobility on steep terrain. The cave proved better than he'd hoped. It went deep into the cliff, with a small underground stream providing fresh water. More importantly, the entrance was surrounded by the strange purple crystals he'd seen everywhere. When he set up his portable lights, the crystals seemed to glow with their own inner light. Over the next few days, Marcus established his new home. He used mining lasers to smooth the cave walls and widen certain passages. The power tools helped him create storage areas and a secure sleeping space. But his most important discovery came by accident. While cutting into the cave wall, his laser hit one of the purple crystals. Instead of melting, the crystal absorbed the energy and created a shimmering force field. Marcus spent hours experimenting with this phenomenon. He found that by positioning the crystals correctly and powering them with his ship's spare power cells, he could create energy barriers across the cave entrance. His body was changing too. At first, he thought the constant fatigue was just from the high gravity. But when he checked his portable medical scanner, he found something surprising. The strange gases in the atmosphere were causing his muscle fibers to become denser. His body was adapting to survive in this hostile environment. 2 weeks after the crash, Marcus faced his first real test. A pack of 6-legged predators found his cave. There were 5 of them, each the size of a small car. But they were stuck on the narrow path, barely able to move past each other. Marcus had prepared for this. He activated his crystal barrier at just the right moment, separating 2 of the beasts from their pack. Trapped in the tight space, the creatures turned on each other. Their fight sent one beast tumbling off the cliff, while the other retreated, badly wounded. The remaining predators backed away, their multiple eyes studying Marcus and his defenses. He could almost see them thinking, calculating. These weren't just animals, they were intelligent hunters, and they had just learned that their prey could bite back. That night, Marcus made notes in his digital journal. Day 14. The predators here hunt in packs and show signs of problem-solving intelligence. But they're over-specialized. Their adaptations to the gravity make them powerful but inflexible. Meanwhile, I'm getting stronger every day, and I have something they don't: tools, and the ability to use them. He looked out at the valley below, where the predator's eyes glowed in the darkness. This is going to be an interesting game of survival, he muttered, checking his crystal barriers one last time before retiring deeper into his cave. The first storm caught Marcus by surprise. Dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them bolts of lightning that struck the crystal formations with devastating force. But instead of shattering, the crystals lit up like a network of purple veins across the landscape. Energy danced between them, creating sheets of shimmering force that deflected the wind and rain. Marcus watched in amazement from his cave as smaller creatures sought shelter beneath the crystal formations. The energy fields were natural protection against the planet's violent weather. He grabbed his tablet and started mapping these safe zones, marking them in relation to his cave. One morning, while exploring a nearby crystal field, Marcus encountered what the locals considered an apex predator. The creature looked like a twisted version of an earth grizzly bear, but twice as large and covered in armored plates. Its muscles bulged grotesquely under the high gravity, and its claws left deep gouges in the rocky ground. Instead of running, Marcus observed. The beast was powerful, yes, but it moved with obvious difficulty. Its massive bulk, adapted for the crushing gravity, made it slow to turn. When it tried to climb over a fallen crystal to reach him, its own weight worked against it. "You're too specialized," Marcus muttered, documenting the creature's movements. "All that muscle and armor is great for fighting, but it limits you. You can't adapt to new situations." His own body, on the other hand, was adapting remarkably well. After a month on the planet, he could run for longer periods despite the gravity. His muscles had become incredibly dense, but remained flexible. The medical scanner showed his bone density increasing too, but not to the point of becoming brittle like the predator's armor. During his explorations, Marcus discovered something else interesting: plants with medicinal properties. One type of moss released a pain-killing substance when crushed. Another plant's sap could seal wounds almost instantly. He began collecting samples, testing them carefully using his ship's medical analysis kit. The real breakthrough came during another storm. Marcus noticed that smaller crystals, when struck by lightning, maintained their energy field for hours afterward. He spent days experimenting, eventually figuring out how to charge them using power cells from his ship. Soon, he had portable force field generators. "It's all connected," he wrote in his journal. "The crystals protect against the storms. The plants evolved healing properties to survive the extreme conditions. Even the predator's armor serves a purpose. But it's also their weakness. They sacrificed adaptability for specialization." His theories were tested when he tracked a group of bear creatures to their hunting grounds. They were attacking smaller prey near a crystal formation, but their bulk prevented them from following when the prey sought shelter among the crystals. The bears' frustration was obvious as they smashed uselessly against the natural barriers. Marcus mapped their territory carefully, noting how they avoided certain areas where the ground was too steep or the crystals too densely packed. He found their dens, marked their hunting patterns, and identified the shortcuts they couldn't use because of their size. One day, while examining some unusual crystal formations, Marcus found something that changed everything. Hidden beneath centuries of growth were geometric patterns too regular to be natural. Walls made of an unknown metal peeked through the crystal layers. Someone, or something, had built structures here long ago. "This changes things," he said, running his hand along the ancient wall. "Those beings must have faced the same challenges I'm facing. Did they survive? Did they thrive? Did they find a way to master this world?" Looking at his reflection in a crystal face, Marcus barely recognized himself. His body had become lean and muscular, adapted to the crushing gravity. But unlike the native predators, he hadn't sacrificed mobility or intelligence. He was becoming something new, not just surviving on this world, but evolving to rule it. Thunder rolled across the valley as another storm approached. Marcus smiled as the crystals began to glow. This time, he was ready. This time, he understood. Marcus knew something was wrong when he saw the usually solitary creatures moving together. A massive storm was approaching, bigger than any he'd witnessed before. The valley's predators were retreating to higher ground, pushing into his territory. He counted at least 30 beasts, a mix of the six-legged hunters and the bear-like creatures, all competing for safe spaces. "This is either going to be very bad or very interesting," he muttered, checking his crystal barriers. The storm clouds above had taken on an ominous purple color, crackling with constant lightning. The air felt heavy, even more than usual. The first fights broke out as predators clashed over shelter spots. Two bear creatures collided near the base of his cliff, their armored bodies crashing together with bone-crushing force. The sound attracted the pack hunters, who circled the fighting giants, looking for an opportunity. Marcus watched carefully, documenting everything. The bear creatures were too busy fighting each other to notice the smaller predators. It gave him an idea. If he could control where these battles happened, he could thin out the population of both species. Using his portable crystal generators, Marcus created a series of force fields, forming a makeshift corridor leading to a dead end near his cave. Then he did something that would have seemed insane just months ago. He deliberately attracted attention. A carefully aimed mining laser shot hit one of the bear creatures in the back. The beast roared, turning to face this new threat. Marcus stood at the entrance of his corridor, clearly visible. The creature charged, exactly as he'd hoped. The corridor's force fields kept the bear creature on a straight path, preventing it from dodging. But Marcus had left specific gaps in the barrier. Through these openings, the pack hunters could slip in and attack the larger predator's flanks. What followed was chaos. The bear creature, unable to turn effectively in the narrow space, found itself under attack from multiple directions. The pack hunters, driven by the approaching storm and the opportunity for a kill, swarmed their larger rival. Marcus watched from his safe position as the predators tore into each other. When a second bear creature, attracted by the commotion, entered the corridor, the situation became even more violent. The two giants couldn't maneuver around each other, making them easy targets for the smaller hunters. But the pack hunters made a crucial mistake. In their frenzy to attack the bear creatures, they didn't notice that Marcus had slowly closed the force field behind them. They were all trapped together. The storm hit with incredible force. Lightning struck the surrounding crystal formations, creating a spectacular light show. The predators below, now realizing their situation, turned their attention from each other to finding an escape. There was none. Marcus had positioned the portable generators carefully. Each lightning strike amplified their power, strengthening the force fields. The predators were caught in a cage of their own making, fighting each other as panic set in. By the time the storm passed, the corridor had become a graveyard. The surviving creatures were badly wounded, their territorial instincts having turned them against each other in their trapped state. Marcus descended carefully to inspect the aftermath. Among the dead was one of the largest bear creatures he'd ever seen. Its armor, nearly impenetrable to the local predators, had been worn down by countless attacks from multiple enemies. Looking at the massive creature, Marcus felt a mix of respect and satisfaction. "You were the apex predator here," he said to the fallen beast. "But you never learned to adapt. You never learned to think beyond your strength." He collected samples from the dead creatures, tissue, armor plates, and claws. Each would help him better understand his opponents. But more importantly, he had proven something. On this world, intelligence and adaptability could overcome raw power. That night from his cave, Marcus heard fewer howls than ever before. The predators had learned a new lesson about their territory's defender. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was changing the rules of their world. 3 months had passed since the crash, and Marcus barely resembled the cargo pilot who had landed on this world. His muscles had become dense and powerful, adapted to the crushing gravity. Yet unlike the native predators, he maintained his agility and speed. The medical scanner showed his bone density had increased by 40%, while his reflexes had sharpened beyond normal human limits. One morning, while checking his crystal barriers, Marcus caught his reflection in a polished piece of ship metal. His body had become lean and muscular, but not bulky like the bear creatures. He could still climb, run, and move quickly, advantages that had kept him alive. Time to expand the territory, he said to himself, gathering his modified mining tools. He had transformed them into weapons. A laser cutter became a precise long-range weapon. Power cells were now portable force field generators, and industrial cables served as electronic tripwires. Marcus had created an early warning system using the crystal formations. By connecting them with power cells, he could detect large creatures moving through his territory. The crystals would pulse with purple light, giving him advance notice of any threats. A warning pulse caught his attention. 3 bear creatures were approaching from the north, moving together. Unusual behavior for normally solitary predators. Marcus checked his tablet, which displayed a map of his crystal network. The beasts were following the exact path he wanted them to take. The first creature triggered a tripwire. Instantly, force fields sprang up on either side, creating a narrow corridor. The bears, too large to turn around, had no choice but to move forward. They reached a clearing where Marcus waited, positioned on a high rock. "Let's test how well you've learned," he said, activating another set of barriers. The clearing was now an arena, but unlike his previous trap, this one had a different purpose. He wanted to face these creatures directly. The first bear charge. 3 months ago, this would have been suicide. But Marcus's adapted body could now handle the planet's gravity as well as any native creature. He dodged with surprising speed, his movements fluid and precise. The beast crashed into a crystal formation, momentarily stunned. Marcus used this moment to attack its exposed joints, the weak points he had discovered in their armor. The creature roared in pain, trying to turn but struggling with its own bulk. The other 2 bears attacked simultaneously. Marcus activated a portable force field, causing one to slam into it while he dealt with the other. His laser cutter found gaps in the creature's armor, precise shots that disabled rather than killed. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, all 3 bear creatures lay wounded but alive. Marcus stood among them, breathing heavily but unharmed. He had proven something important. He could now face the planet's apex predators in direct combat and win. But his greatest triumph came in what happened next. The wounded creatures, after recovering enough to move, retreated from his territory. More importantly, they didn't return. Word spread through the valley's ecosystem in ways he didn't fully understand. Predators began avoiding his expanded territory completely. Later that day, while setting up new crystal barriers, Marcus found his emergency beacon in the ship wreckage. To his surprise, it wasn't as damaged as he'd first thought. With some work, he could probably repair it. Looking at the beacon, then at the valley he now controlled, Marcus felt conflicted. 3 months ago, he'd been desperate for rescue. Now he had become something new, not just a survivor, but a true apex predator on this hostile world. "Maybe a few more weeks," he said, pocketing the beacon. "There's still so much to learn here." In the distance, he heard the howls of pack hunters, but they were far away, avoiding his territory. They had learned what the bear creatures now knew. This part of the valley belonged to a new kind of predator. The ground trembled, waking Marcus from sleep. At first, he thought it was another storm approaching, but his crystal network showed clear skies. The vibrations were coming from deep underground, and they were getting stronger. His tablet showed unusual readings from the crystal formations. They were resonating with whatever was causing the tremors, glowing with a deep purple light he'd never seen before. Something was different about these vibrations. They seemed almost rhythmic. Marcus checked his map of the ancient ruins he'd discovered. The tremors were centered around the largest concentration of old structures. As he watched, the ground near the ruins began to crack open, and something emerged from the depths. They came in waves, creatures unlike anything he'd seen on the surface. They had sleek, crystalline shells that seemed to pulse with the same energy as the formations around them. Each one was about the size of a horse, moving with a grace that defied the planet's crushing gravity. Hibernators, Marcus realized, remembering similar creatures on Earth. They sleep underground during the planet's harsh cycles. But these weren't simple animals waking from a long sleep. As he watched through his scopes, he saw them working together, coordinating their movements. The new creatures spread through the valley in organized groups. Unlike the bear creatures or pack hunters, they moved with obvious intelligence. They didn't fight each other for territory. Instead, they worked as one large group, methodically exploring and claiming areas. Marcus observed them for hours. They used the crystal formations in ways he'd never considered, touching them in specific patterns to create complex energy fields. Some carried pieces of crystal with them, using them as tools. These weren't just predators. They were tool users. His first conflict with them proved this point. A group of 10 approached his territory, moving in a formation that spoke of military precision. When they encountered his force field barriers, they didn't attack blindly. Instead, they studied them, communicated with each other using pulses of light from their crystalline shells, and began systematically testing for weaknesses. "You're not just hunters," Marcus muttered, watching them work. "You're warriors." The creatures found a way through his first line of defense in hours, something that none of the surface predators had managed in months. Marcus activated his most powerful defenses, using everything he'd learned about the crystal formations. The creatures responded by changing their tactics, splitting into smaller groups and attacking from multiple angles. They were learning, adapting, just like him. The battle lasted for days. Every time Marcus thought he'd found a way to stop them, they developed a counter-strategy. They could communicate instantly across large distances using light pulses through the crystal formations. Their crystalline shells made them nearly immune to his laser weapons. But Marcus had one advantage they didn't expect: human unpredictability. Where they were logical and methodical, he could make intuitive leaps. When they expected him to defend, he attacked. When they prepared for an attack, he set traps instead. The turning point came when Marcus noticed something about their leader, a larger creature with a more complex shell pattern. It coordinated the others, but it also limited their creativity. They never acted without its direction, never adapted without its approval. Marcus spent hours modifying his remaining power cells, turning them into electromagnetic pulse devices. The creature's crystalline shells were both their strength and their weakness. They couldn't function if their energy patterns were disrupted. The trap was set. As the leader approached his cave, believing it had Marcus cornered, he activated the pulse. The creature's shell went dark, its connection to the others broken. For the first time, the organized army fell into confusion. Standing over the disabled leader, Marcus realized he faced a choice. He could destroy these intelligent creatures, or he could try something no other predator on this world would consider. He could attempt to communicate with them. The rescue ship appeared in the sky exactly 4 months after Marcus's crash. By then, the valley had changed dramatically. The crystal formations pulsed with organized patterns of light, a new communication network created through cooperation between human ingenuity and alien intelligence. Marcus stood at the entrance of his cave, watching the ship descend. Beside him, the crystalline creature he'd once disabled, now his closest alien ally, flickered with patterns of purple light. They had found a way to communicate through the crystal formations, sharing knowledge that benefited both species. "They're not going to believe this," Marcus said, his voice carrying easily in the heavy atmosphere he'd grown used to. His body, now perfectly adapted to the high gravity, stood straight and strong. The crystalline beings around him pulsed with curious light patterns, studying the approaching ship. The rescue team's faces showed pure shock when their landing craft touched down. They wore heavy-powered armor to handle the gravity, but Marcus stood before them unassisted, his physique dramatically altered by the planet's conditions. Even more shocking were his companions, the intelligent crystalline beings that flanked him protectively. "Welcome to Haven," Marcus said, using the name he'd given this world. "Watch your step. The local wildlife can be a bit intense." As if on cue, a distant roar echoed across the valley, followed by the familiar howls of pack hunters. But these sounds now stayed far from his territory, respecting the boundaries he'd established. The rescue team's scientist, Dr. Turner, could barely contain her excitement. Her scanners whirred constantly, recording everything. "Your body mass has increased by 30%, she said, studying her readings. "Bone density is off the charts, and your neural activity. It's like nothing we've ever seen." Marcus led them on a tour of his domain. He showed them the ancient ruins, now partially excavated with help from the crystalline beings. The structures told a story of a previous civilization that had lived in harmony with the planet's harsh conditions before some disaster forced them underground. The hibernators are their descendants, Marcus explained, pointing to his crystalline allies. They evolved to survive down there, developing their crystalline properties. Now they're ready to reclaim the surface, but they need help understanding how it's changed. That's where I come in. The rescue team's commander stepped forward with news. The company wants to establish a research base here. The mineral wealth alone. But these discoveries, the ruins, the native intelligence, it's beyond anything we expected. Marcus nodded, having anticipated this. I'll help set up the base, but on one condition. He gestured to the valley. This territory stays under my protection. We do this right. No exploitation, no disruption of the ecosystem. We work with the hibernators, learn from them, and help them reclaim their world. The commander looked at the crystalline beings, then at Marcus, a human who had become something more, who had mastered this hostile world not through force alone, but through adaptation and understanding. Agreed. We'll need a local expert anyway, someone who understands both sides. Over the next few weeks, as the first research base took shape, Marcus continued his role as guardian of the valley. He taught the newcomers how to survive, how to respect the world's dangers, and how to communicate with the crystalline beings. The hibernators, in turn, shared more of their ancient knowledge. One evening, standing at his cave entrance, Marcus watched researchers and crystalline beings working together near the ruins. In the valley below, the native predators kept their distance, respecting the new order. The rescue ship's lights glowed softly overhead, a reminder that he could leave any time. But this harsh world had become his home. He had become its apex predator, not by being the strongest or the most vicious, but by being the most adaptable. By learning, changing, and growing. By understanding that true dominance comes not from conquest, but from finding one's place in the natural order of things. The crystals around him pulsed with friendly light patterns. Marcus smiled, sending back his own response through the network he'd helped create. On this hostile alien world, humanity had found not just resources or scientific discoveries, but a new way of belonging to a world beyond Earth.